The emergency beacon cut through the void of space like a scream in the darkness, its desperate signal bouncing off distant stars and racing toward the outer rim territories where few dared to venture. Ambassador Zara Thorne of the peaceful Meridian colony pressed her trembling finger against the transmitter one final time, knowing that this single act would either save her people or doom them all. Emergency code Omega 7, she whispered into the communicator, her voice barely steady as explosions rocked the diplomatic station around her. This is Meridian Colony requesting immediate assistance. We are under attack by the Vorthak Empire. Our defenses have failed. We have civilians trapped. Children. Please, if anyone can hear this, we need help. The transmission ended with a violent shake that sent Zara sprawling across the control room floor. Through the shattered viewport, she could see the massive Vorthak dreadnoughts advancing like metal vultures, their weapons charging with an ominous blue glow. The colony's modest defense fleet had been obliterated in the first 10 minutes of the assault. Now, only the orbital stations remained, and they were falling one by one. Zara had sent the distress call on all frequencies, including the restricted channels that led to the deep space territories. Most civilized species avoided those regions, whispered about in fearful tones across the galaxy. It was there, in the dark between stars, that the Deathworlders made their homes. Nobody knew much about them, except that they came from planets so hostile that simply surviving childhood was considered a miracle by galactic standards. They were the outcasts, the ones who had been deemed too dangerous for polite society. The Galactic Council had banished them to the Outer Rim centuries ago, declaring their homeworlds unsuitable for civilized life and their people incompatible with peaceful coexistence. But right now, as Vorthak soldiers breached the station's hull and began their methodical slaughter of everyone inside, Zara didn't care about politics or social acceptability. She cared about the 1,000 families huddled in the emergency shelters below, praying that someone, anyone, would come to their aid. The first response came 3 hours later, when the colony's main city was already half destroyed and the orbital defenses had gone silent. It wasn't from the Galactic Council's peacekeeping forces, who were apparently tied up in bureaucratic procedures and couldn't possibly respond for another 2 days. It wasn't from the nearby trading confederations, who had suddenly developed urgent business elsewhere. It came from the void itself. Meridian Colony, this is Captain Marcus Kane of the Terran Expeditionary Force, the voice crackled through the emergency channel with surprising clarity. We received your distress call. Help is coming. Zara's blood ran cold. She had heard that name before, Terran. It was whispered in the same breath as words like savage and unstoppable. The Terrans were perhaps the most feared of all the Deathworlder species, hailing from a planet called Earth that was supposedly so violent and unpredictable that it had produced predators at every level of its ecosystem. Their homeworld was said to be a place where the very weather could kill you, where the surface was covered in vast oceans that could swallow entire continents, and where the inhabitants had evolved not just to survive but to thrive in constant conflict. Captain Kane, Zara managed to respond, her voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. We're grateful for any assistance, but I have to warn you, the Vorthak fleet is massive. They have over 50 dreadnoughts and... Ma'am, we're not here to negotiate with them, Kane's voice cut through her words with calm certainty. We're here to remove them. How many civilians do you have left? Approximately 800 in the underground shelters, another 200 scattered across the remaining orbital platforms, Zara replied, ducking as another explosion shook the station. But Captain, you don't understand. The Vorthak Empire has conquered 17 star systems in the past year. Their military is... Ma'am, Kane interrupted again, and this time there was something in his voice that made Zara's spine tingle. With respect, you called us. Trust us to do what we do best. The transmission ended, leaving Zara alone with her fears and the growing sound of Vorthak boots echoing through the station's corridors. She had just potentially condemned an entire species to death by revealing the location of refugees to the galaxy's most notorious warriors. But what choice did she have? At least with the Terrans, there was a chance. The Vorthak, she knew, would show no mercy at all. Commander Vexhai of the Vorthak 4th Fleet stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Inevitable Conquest, watching with satisfaction as his forces systematically dismantled the pathetic defenses of Meridian Colony. The humans who had settled this system were typical of the soft species that infested the galaxy, weak, overly sentimental, and completely unprepared for the reality of cosmic warfare. "Admiral," one of his bridge officers reported, "we've detected an unusual energy signature approaching from the outer system. Long-range sensors are showing multiple contacts." Vexai's four eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical display. "How many ships?" "Difficult to determine, sir. They're using some kind of sensor dampening technology. But preliminary counts suggest perhaps 12 to 15 vessels." The commander's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Reinforcements? How adorable. These humans actually think someone will come to save them." He turned to his weapons officer. "Dispatch the 3rd Squadron to intercept. I want those ships destroyed before they can interfere with our operations." "Yes, sir," the officer replied, but there was an odd hesitation in his voice. "Commander, there's something else. The ships, they're not broadcasting standard identification codes. And their engine signatures don't match any known configuration in our databases." Vexai felt a small flutter of unease in his chest cavity. The Vortak Empire had conquered dozens of systems and faced countless species. Their military databases were comprehensive, containing detailed information about every known starship design in the galaxy. For something to be completely unknown was unusual. "Show me," he commanded. The main viewscreen shifted to display the approaching fleet, and Vexai's unease deepened. The ships were unlike anything he had ever seen. They were angular, aggressive-looking vessels that seemed to have been designed with only one purpose in mind: destruction. Their hulls were dark, almost black, and covered in what looked like armor plating thick enough to stop capital ship weapons. Each ship bristled with weapon ports, and their engine signatures suggested power outputs that should have been impossible for vessels of their size. "Sir," the sensor officer's voice was now openly concerned, "I'm reading massive energy buildups across their entire fleet. They're charging weapons. All ships, battle stations," Vexai ordered, his earlier amusement fading. "Deploy the 3rd and 4th Squadrons. I want those unknowns destroyed before they can." The viewscreen erupted in blinding light as the first volley from the unknown fleet struck the Vortak advance guard. When the glare faded, Vexai stared in shock at the tactical display. 12 Vortak heavy cruisers had simply vanished. Not destroyed in the traditional sense, with debris and escape pods scattered across space. They had been completely obliterated, reduced to their component atoms in the span of seconds. "What was that?" Vexai demanded, his voice rising to a shriek. "What kind of weapons do they have?" Before anyone could answer, the communications array crackled to life. The voice that came through was calm, controlled, and spoke in perfect galactic standard, but there was something underneath it that made every Vortak on the bridge feel like prey animals suddenly exposed in an open field. "Vortak vessels, this is Captain Marcus Kane of the Terran Navy. You are in violation of the Galactic Convention on the Protection of Civilian Populations. You have 60 seconds to begin withdrawal from this system before we open fire." Vexai's mandibles clicked rapidly in what passed for nervous laughter among his species. "Terran? Are you seriously telling me that the Deathworlders have finally crawled out of their holes to play at being heroes?" "Sir," his tactical officer interrupted, "they're targeting our ships with active sensor locks. I'm reading massive energy signatures from their weapon systems." 50 seconds, Kane's voice continued with mechanical precision. "For the record, this is your only warning." Vexai's fear transformed into rage. The Vortak Empire had not conquered 17 star systems by backing down from threats. "All ships, open fire. Destroy those primitive barbarians." The Vortak fleet opened up with everything they had. Hundreds of energy beams and missile volleys streaked across space toward the Terran vessels. It was enough firepower to level a small moon, concentrated into a killing field that no ship could possibly survive. The Terran fleet didn't even bother to dodge. The barrage struck their shields and simply stopped. Energy beams that could punch through battleship armor were absorbed without so much as a flicker. Missiles that could crack planetoid surfaces exploded harmlessly against invisible barriers. And through it all, the Terran ships continued their steady advance, their weapons still charging. "Impossible," Vexai whispered. "Those shield readings, they're off the scale. Nothing can generate that much power. 30 seconds, Kane's voice continued, now with just a hint of what might have been anticipation. I strongly recommend you begin your withdrawal now. But Vexhai was no longer listening. He was staring at the tactical display as more impossible readings flooded in. Each Terran ship was reading as having the power output of a small star. Their armor was thicker than anything in the Vortak arsenal. And their weapons were charging up to levels that shouldn't have been possible without tearing the ships apart from the inside. Sir, his communications officer reported, we're receiving transmissions from the other fleets in the system. They're requesting permission to retreat. No! Vexhai roared. We are the Vortak Empire. We do not retreat from anyone, especially not from Deathworlder scum. 10 seconds, Kane's voice had gone completely cold now. Final warning. Vexhai opened his mouth to issue another defiant order, but the words died in his throat as he saw something that made his blood freeze. The Terran ships were changing. Their hulls were shifting, armor plates retracting to reveal weapon systems that defied all understanding of physics. Each vessel was transforming from a warship into something that looked more like a mobile weapons platform, bristling with enough firepower to sterilize a planet. Time's up, Kane said quietly. The Terran fleet opened fire. What happened next would be remembered in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come, studied as the perfect example of what overwhelming technological superiority looked like in practice. The Terrans didn't just outgun the Vortak fleet, they demonstrated weapons technology that was centuries ahead of anything the galaxy had ever seen. Beams of coherent energy lanced out from the Terran ships, but these weren't the simple laser weapons that most species used. These were something else entirely, streams of exotic matter that seemed to eat through reality itself. Where they touched Vortak ships, the vessels didn't just explode, they simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only expanding spheres of elementary particles. The Vortak 3rd Squadron, 50 ships strong, was erased from existence in the space of 3 seconds. The 4th Squadron lasted slightly longer, managing to get off a desperate return volley before they too were reduced to cosmic dust. Within minutes, the entire Vortak advance force had been eliminated with such clinical efficiency that it was almost beautiful to watch. All Vortak vessels, Kane's voice came across the communications array again, still calm but now carrying an undertone of lethal promise, this is your final opportunity to withdraw from this system. You have demonstrated hostile intent toward civilians under our protection. Any further aggressive action will result in the complete destruction of your fleet. On the bridge of the inevitable conquest, Vexhai stared at the tactical display with growing horror. 2 full squadrons of his finest ships had been obliterated in less than 10 minutes, and the Terran fleet hadn't even taken damage. His sensor readings were telling him impossible things, that the Terran ships were somehow getting stronger, their power signatures increasing as if they were drawing energy from the battle itself. Sir, his tactical officer's voice was barely a whisper, recommend immediate withdrawal. Our weapons are ineffective against their defenses, and their firepower is? He paused, struggling to find words. Sir, each of those ships is reading as having the destructive capacity of our entire fleet combined. Vexhai wanted to retreat. Every instinct screamed at him to order his ships to jump to hyperspace and never look back. But he was a Vortak commander, and the Vortak Empire had never retreated from battle. To do so now would mean not just personal dishonor, but the potential collapse of their entire military reputation. We have them outnumbered 50-1, he said, trying to convince himself as much as his crew. Deploy all remaining squadrons. Surround them. Even if their individual ships are superior, they can't possibly fight our entire fleet at once. It was a reasonable strategy. It might even have worked against any other opponent in the galaxy. But as the Vortak fleet began to spread out in a massive encirclement pattern, the Terran response was swift and decisive. The 12 Terran ships suddenly split apart, each one launching what looked like smaller vessels from their hulls. But these weren't fighters or shuttles, they were something else entirely. Each smaller vessel was actually the size of a Vortak cruiser, and they moved with impossible speed and agility. Sir, the sensor officer's voice cracked with fear, they're launching additional ships. Count is 67, 82, 115. Sir, they're not stopping. Vexhai watched in stunned disbelief as the Terran fleet transformed before his eyes. What had appeared to be 12 ships revealed themselves to be massive carrier vessels, each one disgorging dozens of smaller warships. Within minutes, the Terrans had gone from being outnumbered 50-1 to having numerical parity with the Vorthak fleet. But numbers weren't the only advantage the Terrans had revealed. Their smaller ships moved like nothing Vexhai had ever seen, accelerating and turning at speeds that should have liquefied any organic crew. They darted between Vorthak formations like angry insects, their weapon systems firing with devastating precision. Multiple contacts inbound, the tactical officer reported, his voice barely controlled. They're moving at impossible speeds. Our targeting computers can't get a lock. The Terran assault ships tore through the Vorthak formations like a pack of predators taking down prey. Their weapons were different from the main fleet's reality warping beams. These were more conventional energy weapons, but fired with such speed and accuracy that they might as well have been magic. Each burst found its target, punching through Vorthak armor and shields as if they were made of paper. Return fire! Vexhai screamed. All ships, return fire! The Vorthak fleet responded with everything they had, filling space with a web of energy beams and missile trails. But the Terran ships moved like they were dancing, sliding between the incoming fire with casual ease. And when they did take hits, their shields absorbed the damage without even flickering. Meanwhile, the main Terran fleet had resumed their advance on the planet, their massive forms cutting through space with inexorable purpose. They were no longer just ships, they were statements of power, declarations that the era of Vorthak dominance was over. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving transmission from the planet's surface. The Vorthak ground forces they're requesting immediate evacuation." Vexhai's attention snapped to the surface tactical display, and what he saw there made his blood run cold. The Terran fleet hadn't just brought ships, they had brought troops. And those troops were already on the ground, moving through the occupied areas of Meridian Colony like a force of nature. The reports flooding in from the surface were almost too incredible to believe. Terran soldiers were apparently fighting through entire Vorthak battalions single-handedly. They wore powered armor that shrugged off heavy weapons fire and moved with speed that made them almost impossible to target. Worst of all, they seemed to be completely immune to fear, charging into situations that should have terrified any sane being. "Ground Commander Zekthor to Fleet Command," a panicked voice crackled through the communications array. They're not normal. They're fighting like machines, but they're definitely organic. We hit one with a plasma cannon and he just got back up. Oh no, they're in the command bunker. There." The transmission cut off in a burst of static. "Sir," the tactical officer's voice was now openly pleading, "we need to retreat. Now. Our ground forces are being overrun, our fleet is being decimated, and the Terrans are still advancing. We can't win this." Vexhai stared at the tactical display, watching his carefully planned conquest crumble around him. In the span of an hour, the Vorthak Empire's mightiest fleet had been reduced to a scattered collection of damaged ships fleeing for their lives. The ground forces that had taken days to establish their hold on Meridian Colony were being systematically eliminated by what appeared to be a few hundred Terran soldiers. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the fact that the Terrans were clearly holding back. Their weapons were devastating, but they were being used with surgical precision to avoid civilian casualties. Their ground forces were aggressive and unstoppable, but they were taking prisoners and treating wounded. These were not the savage barbarians that galactic propaganda had portrayed them as. These were professional soldiers, fighting with technology and tactics that made the rest of the galaxy look like children playing with toys. "All ships," Vexhai said quietly, his voice filled with a defeat he had never experienced before, "begin withdrawal from the system. Maximum jump speed." "Sir," the communications officer looked up from his station, "the Terrans are hailing us." The main viewscreen shifted to show the interior of a Terran ship's bridge. The human who appeared on screen was tall and lean, with short-cropped gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. He wore a uniform that was practical rather than ornate, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. "Commander Vexhai," Captain Kane said, his voice carrying clearly across the void, "your forces are withdrawing, which is wise. But before you go, I want to make something very clear. Vexhai forced himself to stand straight despite his defeat. "What do you want, human?" "I want you to carry a message back to your empire," Kane replied, his tone never changing from its calm professionalism. "The Meridian colony is now under Terran protection. Any further aggression against this system or its inhabitants will be met with immediate and overwhelming force. Are we clear? You think you can threaten the entire Vorthak Empire?" Vexhai demanded, trying to salvage some dignity from the situation. Kane's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes made Vexhai take an involuntary step backward. "Commander, I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply stating facts. The Terran Federation has been monitoring your empire's expansion for some time. We've watched you conquer system after system, slaughter civilians, and commit atrocities that would make most species sick. We've stayed out of galactic politics because we were asked to, but that arrangement is over." The human leaned forward slightly, and Vexhai felt like he was being examined by a predator. "The galaxy is about to learn what happens when you threaten people under our protection. I suggest you make sure your empire understands that message." The transmission ended, leaving Vexhai alone with his thoughts and the wreckage of his fleet. As his remaining ships jumped to hyperspace, he found himself wondering if he had just witnessed the end of the Vorthak Empire's expansion, or perhaps the beginning of something much worse. Behind them, the Terran fleet settled into orbit around Meridian Colony, their ships taking up defensive positions that would have been impossible for any other species to maintain. And on the planet's surface, Terran soldiers continued their methodical work, not just driving out the occupying forces but actually helping to rebuild what had been destroyed. It was, Vexhai thought, almost more disturbing than their combat efficiency. What kind of species was so advanced that they could wage war and reconstruction simultaneously? 3 days later, Ambassador Zara Thorne stood in the rebuilt communications center of the Meridian Colony Orbital Station, staring out at the impressive sight of the Terran fleet in formation. Their ships hung in space like metallic guardians, their mere presence enough to deter any thoughts of further aggression. The colony had been saved, but at what cost? The Terrans had been nothing like what she had expected. They were professional, efficient, and surprisingly considerate of civilian needs. But they were also clearly the most dangerous military force she had ever encountered. The ease with which they had dismantled the Vorthak fleet would give nightmares to military strategists across the galaxy. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. Zara activated the communications array to find Captain Kane's face appearing on the screen. "Ambassador Thorne," he said with a slight nod, "I wanted to speak with you before we depart." "Depart?" Zara felt a surge of panic. "But what about the Vorthak? They could come back with reinforcements." Kane's expression remained calm. "They could, but they won't. The Vorthak Empire is currently experiencing some internal difficulties as word of their defeat spreads. Military dictatorships tend to become unstable when their invincibility is proven to be an illusion." "So you're just going to leave us here undefended?" "Not undefended," Kane corrected. "The Meridian system is now under Terran protection. We'll be leaving a small garrison force and some defensive platforms. But more importantly, we'll be establishing a permanent presence in this sector." Zara felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of presence?" "The kind that ensures this never happens again," Kane replied. "Ambassador, your distress call didn't just reach the Terran Federation. It reached 11 other Deathworlder species as well. We've been in contact with them, and we've decided that the galaxy's current power structure is inadequate for protecting peaceful civilizations." "What does that mean?" Kane was quiet for a moment, and Zara got the impression that he was choosing his words carefully. "It means that the Deathworlders are no longer content to remain in the Outer Rim. We're going to start taking a more active role in galactic affairs. The Vorthak Empire was just the beginning. The Galactic Council won't stand for that," Zara said, though even as she spoke the words, she realized how hollow they sounded. "The Galactic Council," Kane said with the faintest hint of a smile, "is about to discover that their authority only extends as far as their ability to enforce it. And after today, I think everyone in the galaxy is going to be reassessing their capabilities." The transmission ended, leaving Zara alone with her thoughts and the growing realization that she had just witnessed the beginning of a fundamental shift in galactic politics. The Deathworlders were no longer content to be exiles and outcasts. They were coming back to the civilized galaxy, and they were bringing with them technology and military might that made every other species look like children. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the fact that they were doing it all in the name of protecting the innocent. How do you argue against protectors who are more dangerous than the threats they're protecting you from? The answer, Zara realized, was that you don't. You simply hope that they remain committed to their stated principles, and pray that you never give them a reason to reconsider their definitions of innocent and threat. 6 months later, the galaxy was a very different place. The Vortak Empire had collapsed into civil war as various factions fought for control of the remaining territories. 3 other aggressive species had suffered similar fates when they made the mistake of testing Terran resolve. The Galactic Council had been forced to acknowledge the Terran Federation and 10 other Deathworlder governments as legitimate powers, despite their obvious discomfort with the situation. But the most significant change was in the attitudes of the galaxy's countless peaceful civilizations. For the first time in centuries, they had protectors who were actually capable of protecting them. The Deathworlders had established a network of mutual defense treaties that covered nearly half the galaxy's inhabited systems. Pirates, slavers, and aggressive empires found themselves facing opposition that was both overwhelming and utterly without mercy. The age of galactic peace through superior firepower had begun. Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation stood on the observation deck of the massive space station that now orbited Meridian Colony, watching the steady stream of ships passing through the system. Merchants, diplomats, refugees, and explorers all moved through what had become one of the galaxy's most important trade hubs. The transformation was remarkable. What had been a backwater colony was now a thriving center of interstellar commerce. Admiral, her aide approached with a datapad. We've received another request for assistance. The Kalari Republic is reporting attacks by an unknown species from beyond the galactic rim. Chen took the pad and scanned the information. The Kalari were one of the galaxy's oldest peaceful civilizations, known for their art and philosophy. They had never harmed anyone, which made them perfect targets for the kind of predators that seemed to emerge from the void with disturbing regularity. Response time to the Kalari system, she asked. 18 hours with the new jump drives, the aide replied. The 11th Fleet is already standing by. Chen nodded. The Terran Federation had learned from the Meridian incident that reactive defense was insufficient. They now maintained rapid response fleets throughout their area of responsibility, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. The galaxy's predators were learning that attacking peaceful civilizations was no longer a safe or profitable enterprise. Authorize the deployment, she ordered. And send a message to the Kalari government. Tell them help is on the way. As her aide left to carry out the orders, Chen reflected on how much had changed since the desperate distress call from Ambassador Thorne. The galaxy had been forced to confront the reality that true peace could only be maintained by those willing and able to fight for it. The Deathworlders, once exiled as too dangerous for civilized society, had become the galaxy's guardians. But Chen knew that this was just the beginning. The universe was vast and full of threats that even the Deathworlders hadn't encountered yet. There were entire regions of space that remained unexplored, civilizations that had never made contact with the galactic community, and dangers that lurked in the void between stars. The day would come when the Deathworlders would face something that tested even their capabilities. When that day arrived, Chen hoped that the galaxy they had worked so hard to protect would be ready to stand with them. Because in the end, the greatest strength of the Deathworlders wasn't their technology or their military might. It was their willingness to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. And that was a principle worth fighting for, no matter what the cost. Down on the planet's surface, Ambassador Zara Thorne walked through the reconstructed capital city of Meridian Colony, marveling at how quickly it had been rebuilt. The Terrans had brought construction technology that was as advanced as their military hardware, and the city now stood as a testament to what could be accomplished when resources were unlimited and efficiency was paramount. But more than the buildings or the technology, what struck Zara was the change in the people. The colonists who had once lived in fear of the next attack now went about their daily lives with confidence and hope. Children played in parks that had been battlefields just months before. Families planned for the future instead of simply surviving the present. It was the kind of transformation that was supposed to take generations, not months. But then again, the Deathworlders seemed to specialize in making the impossible happen. Ambassador, a familiar voice called out behind her. Zara turned to see Captain Kane approaching, though he was now wearing civilian clothes instead of his military uniform. After the battle, he had requested permission to remain on Meridian Colony as a civilian advisor, helping to coordinate the integration of Terran technology and methods with the colony's existing infrastructure. Marcus, she said, using his first name as she had grown comfortable doing over the past months. Any word from the Kalari system? The 11th Fleet arrived 2 hours ago, Kane replied. Whatever was attacking them has already withdrawn. It seems our reputation is starting to precede us. Zara nodded, though she couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. That's good news, but I can't help wondering what happens when we encounter something that isn't intimidated by our reputation. Kane was quiet for a moment, and Zara could see that he had been thinking about the same thing. When that day comes, he said finally, we'll adapt. It's what we do best. Is it really that simple? No, Kane admitted. But it's what we have to believe if we're going to keep doing this job. The galaxy is full of dangers that we can't even imagine yet. All we can do is be ready for whatever comes next. As they walked through the bustling streets of the colony, Zara reflected on the irony of the situation. The galaxy's most feared warriors had become its most trusted protectors. The species that had been exiled for being too dangerous were now the ones everyone turned to when danger threatened. But perhaps that wasn't ironic at all. Perhaps it was exactly what should have been expected. Who better to protect the innocent than those who had learned to survive in a universe that seemed determined to kill them? The thought was interrupted by a priority alert from the communications center. Both Kane and Zara rushed to the nearest public terminal, where an emergency broadcast was already playing. This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Federation, the announcement began. We have received credible intelligence of a massive fleet movement in the Andromeda sector. All civilian traffic is advised to avoid the region until further notice. Military assets are being repositioned to investigate. Kane frowned as he studied the star charts being displayed. The Andromeda sector is beyond our normal patrol routes. Whatever's out there, it's coming from deep space. Another aggressive species? Zara asked. Maybe, Kane replied, but his tone suggested he wasn't convinced. Or maybe something else entirely. We've always known that the galaxy was bigger than our little corner of it. We might be about to find out what else is out there. The broadcast continued with technical details and reassurances that the situation was under control, but Zara could see the concern in Kane's eyes. After months of dealing with conventional threats, the Deathworlders might be about to face something that would test their capabilities in ways they had never experienced. As they watched the reports, neither of them noticed the subtle change in the colony's defensive sensors. Deep space monitoring arrays that had been quiet for months suddenly began registering anomalous readings from the outer system. Something was out there, moving through space with purpose and intelligence. And it was heading directly for Meridian Colony. The first sign of the new threat came 18 hours later, when the colony's long-range sensors detected a massive gravitic disturbance at the edge of the system. Whatever was causing it was huge, easily the size of a small moon, and it was moving at impossible speeds through normal space. Admiral Chen, the sensor operator on the orbital station, reported, "We're reading an object approximately 15 kilometers in diameter approaching from the outer system. It's not using any form of propulsion we can identify." On the main screen, Admiral Chen studied the readings with growing concern. The object was moving at nearly 10% of light speed through normal space, without any visible means of propulsion. That should have been impossible according to every known law of physics. Time to intercept? At current speed, approximately 6 hours, the operator replied. Admiral, there's something else. The object is emitting some kind of signal. It's not directed at us, but it's massive. The power output is reading as equivalent to a small star. Chen felt a chill run down her spine. In her years of service, she had learned to trust her instincts, and right now every instinct was screaming that they were facing something unprecedented. "Alert all ships in the system," she ordered. "Battle stations. And get me a direct line to Terran command." As the station erupted into activity around her, Chin found herself wondering if this was the test she had been expecting. The Deathworlders had proven themselves against conventional threats, but what happened when they faced something that operated outside the normal rules of reality? The answer, she suspected, was about to be revealed. On the planet's surface, Kane felt the subtle vibration in his communication device that indicated a priority alert. He stepped away from the construction site he had been inspecting and activated the device. "Kane here. Marcus, this is Admiral Chen. We have a situation developing. I need you to oversee the colony's evacuation procedures." Kane's blood ran cold. The Terrans had established evacuation protocols for Meridian Colony, but they had never expected to actually use them. The colony's defenses were supposed to be impregnable. What kind of situation? Unknown contact approaching from deep space. It's not responding to communications, and it's using technology we don't recognize. I'm not taking any chances with civilian lives. Kane was already moving toward the colony's command center. Understood. How much time do we have? 6 hours, maybe less. The object is moving faster than anything we've ever seen. As Kane reached the command center, he found Ambassador Thorne already there, coordinating with the colony's emergency services. The evacuation was proceeding with typical Terran efficiency, but Kane could see the fear in the faces of the colonists. "They're scared," Thorne said quietly as she joined Kane at the command station. "They should be," Kane replied. "If Admiral Chen is calling for an evacuation, it means we're facing something that even the Terran Federation considers a serious threat." Above them, the colony's defensive systems were coming online. Orbital platforms that had been quietly monitoring space.